let's touch upon the topic of what are the first barriers to communication and listening. What actually get in the way, so that then we can talk about how we can uh, overcome those barriers and how can we can work on those barriers. So when it comes to barriers in communication and listening, we just do come to the favorite part again, which we have been talking about, is the inner chatter, right? So if we can classify all those barriers, we could just put them under five different blocks, which is the psychological barriers and language barriers, cultural barriers, organizational barriers, and physical barriers. So coming to psychological barriers, let's talk about inner chatter. What is this inner chatter all about?
See, they say that in a day, the number of thoughts that the mind generates, is a huge number. It seems around 70,000 on an average. 70,000 on an average, right? So we are talking about a large number of thoughts that the mind creates. Well, that's its job, right? But what is important is to get yourself to receive somebody's words, somebody's expression, and be able to connect to the thought that they have. So, in that sense, when we have this inner chatter and thoughts coming in over and over and over, it's very difficult to have an additional thought that enters our mind and gets received, gets connected to us. Another thing that happens is when I'm talking now about something, again, your mind is generating a lot of thoughts in relation to that, right? And that also could be hampering or could be a barrier to the additional information that gets into you, that is being conveyed, right? So, in that sense, inner chatter has uh, certain advantages, of course, in terms of you now taking the seed from the other person of communication and generating for your own self, creating additional thoughts in relation to that subject. So one has to know when it is a barrier and when it is something that could enable.
So, when we talk about inner chatter, it's a whole, like Shivan said, it's a different kinds of things. One is the noise in the heads, which is constantly running in our head, like 70,000 thoughts per day running through our head and spinning and swimming in our head. And how much of it is really, useful? How much of it is repetitive? How much of it is about something that's happening right now, about the past or the future? How does it work actually?
Well, based on personal experience and more importantly, the what I have read in scientific literature about close to 80 to 90% of the thoughts are unproductive ones, mostly dealing with the past or with the future, anxiety about the future or worries of the past, or some data recollection of some events that kept happening, which are kind of neutral in nature. But the main point to note and to be aware of is the productive nature of those thoughts, and this awareness itself creates and helps us distinguish and provides a choice to choose in terms of what to retain and what not to focus on. To your other question, so this is from a broadly the data spread perspective in terms of the nature of the thoughts. While I'll not go too deep, what helps us in this process to keep the thoughts minimal and channelized is things like meditation. And this actually, lack of doing this actually prevents us from being in the present. When we are actually in action, immersed in action in any kind, the the thought rate of generation is close to zero, right? When we are fully immersed in anything, it can be a discussion, it can be doing some other action, is close to zero. But at the slightest chance of us not being immersed, the thoughts start rising. So for example, let's say we are a part of a discussion meeting, which we are not fully involved in, right? So, either the topic could need not be of our interest, or the way the discussion is going is not to our liking. The thoughts start wandering, and the 70,000 start generating at its full pace. And coming to the present is a challenge. Same as with other cases, right? But when we are actually actively involved, when we are leading a discussion, when we genuinely show interest, then we are fully immersed in whatever is happening. And it is this that we all should strive towards, to be in the present.
Let's say, so Tapaswini comes to my office, okay, and starts conversing with me. As a student coming to a professor's office, there is always this internal fear. Am I right in saying what I'm conveying, right? So this fear it could also be a barrier in terms of what you actually want to convey, right? Sometimes it may not be clarity. You may be just blabbering, and the professor has to understand what you're talking about. Comforting the other person probably will reduce that fear. Just now, when Karthik was talking about, I saw a couple of students just going through the WhatsApp or whatever social media. Why? Because there is this either lack of interest, or there is this anxiety in the mind. Oh, what if this person has sent me some message? What if I don't see it right now? Right? Will that person get angry? Right? So all these come into picture, and when that happens, sometimes in the class, when I'm teaching in the class, and sometimes when this happens, naturally I get angry, right? So this is anger is also a barrier, because when I'm talking with anger in my mind, the way that I express things probably will not be well received by the other person, right? So all these could be barrier. Sometimes people freeze when they get angry, right? You are only communicating that you are angry, but why you're angry, what it is that is bothering you, all these don't come out, right? And therefore, one who communicates with the other should also be looking at these barriers that may happen. And the only way that one can communicate better is to be aware that you are going through this fear or anxiety or any of these emotions that sort of engulf you.
So, to summarize about the psychological barriers, I would say in a chatter, the emotional state of the person speaking and also the person who is listening, these are really play a very important role in how much is actually we are able to listen or speak, or what are we able to say what we want to say, because of this inner thing that's going on. Sometimes we may be saying something like Shiva said, like, I'm angry or I'm anxious or I'm nervous or I'm afraid. Then what I mean to say and what I actually say, there could be a difference. So a distortion happens in the communication. Similarly, while listening, also that's what happens when there is this, the thoughts and emotions which are there. They can cloud our thinking, they can cloud our rational mind, and the way we listen to something or how we interpret or how we, try to understand that, the whole meaning can completely change. So what they mean to say versus what we actually hear and how we interpret it and how we assume it, or different kinds of judgments that we can make, all these play a very important role in communication.